Today's video is brought to you by Squarespace. So everybody's aware that I love Hunter x Hunter, and especially the Chimera Ant arc. I mean, I'm literally a walking spoiler for the show. And arguably, my favorite thing about the Chimera Ant arc is that it creates more questions than any other arc in Hunter x Hunter. There is no other arc in Hunter x Hunter with as much mystery and foreshadowing as the Chimera Ant arc. I know this is probably because the Chimera Ant arc is Hunter x Hunter's longest arc, but the tonal shift and the character building that occur in the Chimera Ant arc are also master class. But really, like I said, what makes the arc great is the questions it raises. Questions like, who is Gyro? Will we ever see him again? Will Gon ever get his Nen back? And where did the Chimera Ants come from? Or I guess more importantly than that, how did they end up in East Gorteau? See, because when you really sit back and think about it, the Chimera Ants ending up in East Gorteau was a blessing for them. It was objectively the perfect situation for something like the Chimera Ants to grow out of control. Dropped in a country with no hunters, no outside help, and very few means of communication, the Chimera Ants could flourish like they could nowhere else. Outside of this, the country that they popped up in was led by a dictator who was very poorly guarded and had the ability to pull all of his citizens to his palace like that. So a poorly defended, all-powerful dictatorship that can be easily controlled as a literal puppet, with the means to command millions of people to abandon their homes and gather together in one small place, all with the inability to communicate with the outside world or really defend themselves. That is the perfect breeding ground for something that needs to eat humans. But did the Chimera Ants end up in East Gorteau by accident? Or was it on purpose? Now, of course, you can make the incredibly logical argument that the Chimera Ants are supposed to represent how diseases can grow in less advanced countries very quickly, and how places that actively refute outside help usually end up the breeding grounds for diseases that affect the entire world. That would be an incredibly cool, nuanced, and precise political statement that holds water to this very day. But those kind of well-written, understated stories are boring. We don't want logical narrative devices that apply to the real world. We want big, bad, bang-em-up theories. What, instead of a well-thought-out political statement about countries around the world that shut themselves off from outside forces probably being an issue as it pertains to global health, the Chimera Ants ending up in East Gorteau was actually a dark plot created by some of the strongest people in the Hunter x Hunter universe. Because that's what we're going to be talking about today, how the Chimera Ants ended up in East Gorteau, an incredibly advantageous situation for them through no sheer coincidence. But who is this dark force that's controlling this army of Chimera Ants from the shadows? Well, that would be none other than two of the greatest antagonists in Hunter x Hunter's history, beyond Netero and Periston Hill. But the theory goes even further beyond that. Because why would Beyond Netero and Periston Hill unleash this army of B-level threats on an unsuspecting country? Well, with one goal and one goal alone in mind. And that goal was to kill Isaac Netero. Yes, that's right. Isaac Netero's son and Isaac Netero's closest confidant, Periston Hill, worked together to kill the leader of the Hunter Association, the strongest man on Earth. But why did they do it? Well, we're gonna answer all those questions and more in a second here, guys, but please, first, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, hit that noti bell. And if you love the idea of me talking about my anime tattoos, you guys are gonna love my anime podcast that I do every week with Danny Mata. It's called Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny break down everything that happened in anime this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. But before we get into all that, guys, today we gotta talk about our favorite reoccurring sponsor to the page, Squarespace. Squarespace is your one-stop shopping opportunity to build the website of your dreams. Whether that website be for a brand, a page, or a business, there is no better space than Squarespace. This could be a website selling anime merch, food, or custom stickers. It doesn't matter. There's no better place to get started than Squarespace. But I know what you're saying. You're saying,
Nick, I don't have a degree in website design. I can't just sit down and make the website of my dreams.
But Squarespace makes the building process not only intuitive, but incredibly easy. And building this beautiful website will not only make it easier to engage with your customers or fans, but also sell your product. And one of the tools that makes your life a heck of a whole lot easier are member areas. A tool that allows you to put content or products behind a paywall. And only those who pay for access to those specific areas get access to that content or product, which can create an entirely new revenue stream for people like me. And speaking of things that Squarespace has that help people like me, they also offer one of the most intuitive video content creation tools on the market, which allows you, without even leaving your Squarespace website, to make clickable and engaging videos for your audience. An audience that you can keep track of using the analytical tools that Squarespace provides. And these analytics not only tell you how your business is doing, but how to improve your business, as you're able to find find out where site visits or sales are coming from, which can give you insight into where you need to spend your time advertising. And when you're ready to launch that perfect website, go to squarespace.com/WeebCommander for 10% off your website or domain. So what are you guys waiting for? Get out there and build the brand that you know you can. So before we get to diving into any of these questions, I'd like to say that this theory is not my own. It was originally posted on Quora 2 years ago by a user by the name of Kane2Con. So with like any theory that I either get emailed or find on the internet, you better believe I'm supplementing it with some of my own knowledge. So the Chimera Ants, one of the most imposing, if not the most imposing villain in the entirety of Hunter x Hunter's anime. I say anime because if we're being real, we've run into worse things in the manga. But this B-level threat, according to the Hunter Association, kind of popped out of nowhere. See, the first time that we see Chimera Ants is when Gon and Killua use a company to fly to Kite after Greed Island. And upon being teleported to Kite, Gon and Killua find themselves in a mysterious situation, in a foggy forest surrounded by nothing, except of course a large anthill. A large anthill that Gon and Killua accidentally stumble upon. However, these ants aren't regular ants, and as these ants begin to bite Gon and Killua, out of nowhere, Kite emerges, specifically to destroy all of the ants that Gon and Killua have come into contact with. See, it's at this point that it's revealed by Kite that these are Chimera ants. Ants with the ability to cross their genes with anything that they consume. And therefore, since they had come into contact with Gon and Killua's blood, they would become significantly more humanified in their next generation. Therefore, Kite, who was quarantining these ants, had to destroy all of them. But East Korto is kind of in the middle of nowhere, existing on an island off the continent of Yorbia, the continent where York New City is located, in the country of the United States of Saherta. So how did this area with incredibly low foot traffic end up having Chimera ants? Especially when you consider the fact that Chimera ants are theorized to come from the Dark Continent. But regardless of how we speculate the Chimera ants got to this area, because they weren't technically in East Korto, I think they were in West Korto or one of the other republics around that area, because they don't go into East Korto until later in the arc. The Chimera ants were originally introduced to are just that. Ants. They're the size of regular ants and show no properties of other animals outside of ants. So how do we go from just ants to the Chimera Queen in just a couple of episodes? Now, once again, the logical answer would be that there was different colonies of ants that propagated separately. In the colony of ants that the queen propagated from were able to get their hands on more animals. Fish, cows, pigs, humans. And as they slowly intermixed this DNA into their colony, they slowly got larger and larger until eventually somebody like the Chimera Ant Queen was born. While the colony that Kite was keeping an eye on obviously never had the chance because he was quarantining them. And this is definitely a possibility. However, what's weird about that possibility is that there would have to be countless generations between just ants and the Chimera Queen. We understand that what the Chimera Ant Queen eats is reflected in the children she has. If she eats a salmon, she'll have a salmon ant mix. And because of this, all of the Chimera ants that we see throughout the Chimera Ant arc are different animals. There's wolves, there's chameleons, there's butterflies, there's fish, there's turtles. All reflections of what the Chimera Ant Queen ate while pregnant with all of these ants. However, the only Chimera ant out of all of the Chimera ants ever born outside of the Chimera Ant Queen who's able to change their own physiology by eating something is Meruem. See, Meruem has an ability known as Nen synthesis, where if you eat somebody, specifically their brain, who has Nen, he's able to synthesize their Nen ability. But no other Chimera ant, regardless of what they eat, is able to change their physiology by eating that thing. What they are biologically is decided by the Chimera Ant Queen that created them, and what that Chimera Ant Queen ate while having them. But at the same time, biologically, since we've seen the beginning phase of what a Chimera ant looks like without any other DNA spliced into its genes, that biologically there are limits to how much larger the child they create can be than the original queen. Which is why I said working from that small generation of ants all the way up to the Chimera Queen would take countless generations. It would objectively take years, if not decades. However, if this were to hypothetically happen in the wild, there would be a couple of years in the middle where there was 2 to 3 to 4 foot ants walking around. And even in a place like East Korto, that wouldn't go unnoticed. So the jump from ants this size to 6 foot tall ants probably had to happen somewhere else. And that's what this theory speculates on. See, before we move any further with this theory, it's important to note who our two bad guys are here. Beyond Netero and Pariston Hill. See, for those of you who are anime only, you don't know who Beyond Netero is. You do know Pariston, but Beyond Netero is Netero's son. And considering the fact that Netero was almost 150 at the time of his birth, Beyond Netero is also pretty old. But Beyond Netero, just like his father, is an incredibly talented Nen user. And therefore, Beyond Netero, just like his father, has controlled the manipulation of his Nen to make sure none of it leaks from him and therefore ensure that he will live an unnaturally long life, just like his father. Which is why Beyond Netero was able to go on an expedition to the Dark Continent 50 years ago. Specifically, Beyond Netero went on the last expedition to the Dark Continent, the expedition that stopped all other expeditions from happening. And for those of you who need a quick brush up on your Hunter x Hunter history, you'll know that every single country of the original V5 countries sent an expedition to the Dark Continent because they were all kind of in an arms race to make sure that the other countries wouldn't get a foothold and therefore a monopoly over whatever resources were on the Dark Continent. However, 99.9% of the people who went to the Dark Continent died there. And every single one of these V5 expeditions brought back something known as the 5 calamities. Things like the Hellbell, an immortality disease that makes you eat your own skin. And therefore, every single expedition was a massive failure. But think back to what we've already stated in this video. The Chimera ants are theorized to have come from the Dark Continent, but the Chimera ants, ironically, aren't listed as one of the 5 calamities. All of the other calamities have a higher threat rating than the Chimera ants, which makes sense when you consider the fact that Aluka's Nanika is most likely and it's sort of like infinitely powered and has the ability to grant any wish. But if the Chimera ants are in fact from the Dark Continent, that means that one of the expeditions to the Dark Continent had to be the people to bring them back. Which means there's a 1 in 5 chance that Beyond Netero's expedition were the people to bring back the Chimera ants. And quite honestly, his expedition being the people who brought back the Chimera ants is the most compelling out of all the options. See, one of the reasons that 10,000-year-old Earth purists say that evolution didn't happen is because we have none of the middle steps anymore. We're all of the half human, half apes. Here's a little hint. They all evolved into us. If you're half evolved, you're gonna get wiped out by everything else. Evolution's driving process is to make it long enough to propagate. So the second that there's somebody out there who's a bit more bipedal or has a more evolved frontal lobe than you, they're gonna take that rock they now understand they can use as a weapon and bash your half monkey, half human brains in. This is what I wish I could do to every person who is like, oh yeah, where's the middle people? Also, they still exist. There are tons of animals who are definitely still in the middle of their evolutionary process. But in Hunter x Hunter, the reason that we have none of these middle Chimera ants isn't because they don't exist or because we went from small ant to big ant immediately. This theory posits that the reason that we don't have that middle evolution is because it happened in a controlled environment. That is to say, in the 50 years between Beyond Netero's first expedition to the Dark Continent and his second one, he was creating something that could kill his own father, using the technology, or I should say the biological life he discovered in the Dark Continent. See, the first couple of evolutions of the Chimera ant aren't threatening to humans. However, as they become larger and gain more properties from other animals, they absolutely are threatening to humans. Though it would genuinely take the highest caliber of Chimera ant, those like the Royal Guards or Meruem, to battle against Beyond Netero. Therefore, he was completely in control of the situation. See, the reason that people speculate that Beyond Netero was creating the Chimera ants that he wanted in a controlled environment is because in the beginning of the Secession Contest arc, Beyond Netero states that he's been planning this second expedition to the Dark Continent for 50 years. But why did he need to kill his father in order to achieve this secondary expedition to the Dark Continent? Because Netero, as the leader of the Hunter Association, stated that Beyond Netero couldn't make a second expedition to the Dark Continent until he died. Now, it's revealed in a conversation between Maya's Thumb and Karapika that Netero probably created this role because he wanted Beyond Netero to try to kill him. See, Netero pretty much stayed alive for the meme of it. See, Netero was always chasing a good time. It's why he challenged Gon and Killua to his ball-holding game. It's why he elected Periston to be one of the 12 Zodiacs, even though he knew Periston was constantly trying to undercut him. Netero thought countering all of Periston's moves was enjoyable. The constant game of cat and mouse that the two of them played is the reason that he kept Periston so close to it. And therefore, even though Netero was aware of almost all of Periston's schemes, he let them play out. And this was absolutely one of them. See, outside of the fact that Escorto would probably notice the middle evolutions of the Chimera ants, there's also the small fact that the Chimera ant queen who ends up creating Meruem had an incredibly advantageous position, not just because she was located in Escorto, but the cave she was placed in had an abundance of food. Bats, fish, turtles, all things she could consume while being slightly injured and therefore make soldier ants to go and help her find more food. Tie that into the fact that she explicitly states that she believes that her DNA is spliced with a human's, which makes sense when you consider the fact that she has cognitive thought and the ability to speak, at least into the mind of her soldiers, and her being the product of an experiment that spliced the genes of a large chimera ant together with a female human starts to make a good amount of sense. But I know what you're saying. You're saying,
Nick, but she was injured. Why would somebody who placed her in a cave injure her?
if you want this chimera ant queen to propagate a bunch of strong ants that are going to cause a calamity that Netero has to come and fix, why would you injure her? Well, if you think about it, the fact that one of her legs was destroyed was actually kind of advantageous for her, especially when you think about it from an experiment standpoint. See, let's say hypothetically Beyond Netero created the chimera ant queen and then just threw her in HxH's. The chimera ant queen herself was not that strong. I mean, we saw plenty of soldier ants get taken out by something as small arms fire. Any member of the HxH's gyro gang with an AK-47 would have seen this ant and sprayed her down. And then there goes 50 years of experimentation. However, if hypothetically you injure her so her mobility is limited and put her in a cave where no one will discover her, a cave with enough food that she will be able to propagate a small army of soldier ants, you're not only protecting your most valuable asset, the thing that can quite literally make you an army of soldier ants, but you're also ensuring that that most valuable asset that has free will and the ability to talk and communicate won't try to leave the cave. But the reasoning for injuring the chimera ant queen go even further beyond that. See, the reason that the Hunter Association even began to get a sniff of what was going on in HxH's is because the chimera ant queen washes up on the shore next to York New City, which, mind you, is kind of insane. As like I've already stated, the Republic of HxH's is an island off the south side of the Yorbia continent. That means that this leg, after it came off the chimera ant queen, had to float all the way from the southern side of this continent to the eastern side of this continent, which I guess is absolutely a possibility, but considering the timeline of us seeing the queen in the cave and how fast Kite is responding to the situation, it looks kind of suspect. For this leg to float all the way from the southern islands of the Yorbia continent to the eastern side of the Yorbia continent would take months, if not years. The Yorbia continent is modeled after North America, with the HxH's, WEEBCOMMANDER, and the NGL all existing in the area of where Jamaica, Haiti, and Cuba would exist. York New City, on the other hand, is like Los Angeles. Now, assuming that South America didn't exist because in Lake Mobius, North and South America aren't connected, that would be like a piece of driftwood leaving Jamaica and floating all the way around Central America to Los Angeles, which wouldn't happen in a matter of days. Like I said, it would take months, if not years. Not to mention incredibly lucky and coincidental tidal patterns, which is why Kite's team wasn't able to speculate where this leg could have come from, which leads Kite to speculate that instead of the creature which lost this leg washing up on York New City and then losing its leg there, that instead this creature washed up somewhere else and then had its leg severed, which is what this theory posits, that after dropping the chimera ant queen off in HxH's in a cave that nobody would find, that Beyond or Periston dropped the leg off that they stole from the chimera ant queen on the shores of York New City to get the Hunter Association looking for where this leg came from, because they knew they were fully aware to genetically sequence this leg and find out that it was a chimera ant and therefore deduce how large that chimera ant was. And considering the fact that the length of this body part would show that this chimera ant was 6 feet long, that would cause the Hunter Association to begin moving towards quarantining and getting rid of all of these chimera ants, thus putting these chimera ants directly in Netero's crosshairs. But also, since the leg had been placed on the shores of York New City, extrapolating where this leg came from using tidal charts would be impossible, and therefore the chimera ant queen would be guaranteed a certain amount of time to propagate a strong enough army and therefore continue eating good food that would make stronger and stronger chimera ants, till eventually she would be given enough time to create a chimera ant that would be able to kill Netero. At every point we've elucidated thus far ties all of this to Beyond, not Periston. In fact, after Netero's death, Periston cried to Cheadle, devastated by the news that Isaac Netero had passed, for a very similar reason that Isaac Netero would be upset if Periston died. He had lost the one man on Earth who kept him entertained, the one man on Earth who was able to counter-move against every single move that Periston made against him to undermine him. So how does Periston work his way into any of this? Well, we learned from Knuckle and Nove that while the chimera ants were propagating in HxH's and getting stronger by the minute, that Periston, as the pseudo-leader of the 12 Zodiacs, was purposely moving against efforts to send strong hunters to the extermination team. That is to say that Periston was purposely crippling the effort to kill the chimera ants, at least in the early days. Because if hypothetically the 12 Zodiacs had sent some of the strongest hunters they had, like, oh, I don't know, themselves to Yscorto in the early days of hearing the reports of the Chimera ants, they would have been able to eradicate the issue like that. However, since Yscorto had basically no defenses against fighting against this onslaught of Chimera ants, these Chimera ants were not only able to increase in number, but also in power. But that still doesn't answer the question, why for Periston? Well, Periston would join Beyond for a couple of reasons. One, Periston also wants to go to the Dark Continent. He's currently on his way. Ironically, and helpfully enough for this theory, as Beyond's #1. See, the second that Netero died, Beyond Netero announced his intentions to go to the Dark Continent. And as soon as he got a team together, he made Periston his #1. As if they already had a long-standing connection, like they knew each other, like there was some agreement between the two of them that if something happened, that Periston would become Beyond Netero's #1. So it's a possibility that Beyond approached Periston, fully understanding the relationship that Periston and Netero had in the first place, and told him, if you help me kill my father, I will bring you to the Dark Continent on my expedition as my #1. Outside of this, once again, considering the relationship between Periston and Netero in the first place, that Periston was always trying to find a way to foil Netero's plans. So if Netero was aware of Beyond and Periston's plan, why didn't he do anything about it? Well, for two reasons. One, confidence, and two, because he wanted a game. See, we know that before Netero even went to Yscorto to battle against Meruem, he had the Dictator's Rose installed on his heart, which meant that Netero was fully aware that he could and probably would die in Yscorto. But the proposition of an enemy who was finally strong enough to push Netero to his boundaries was too great a possibility for Netero to pass up. And therefore, instead of going over the head of Periston and sending as many powerful hunters as he could to Yscorto to wipe out the Chimera Ant Plague, Netero dedicated himself to remastering Nen techniques he hadn't used in years, meditating to increase his Ren to give himself the best possible chance at having an interesting fight with Meruem. Netero was fully aware that this was Periston's biggest ever ploy, and therefore Netero had to meet it with his biggest ever counter. And even though this plan was formulated to kill Netero and make travel to the Dark Continent possible, Periston was still broken up about it, which is why he cried to Cheadle. Not because he was sad that the man, Isaac Netero, was gone, but because he was sad that the one person who kept him entertained amongst the 12 Zodiacs and the leaders of the Hunter Association was gone. See, it's kind of like the Joker and Batman. The Joker doesn't want to kill the Batman because without Batman, the Joker doesn't know what he would be, who he would play with. But the Joker is always ploying on how to kill the Batman. Much in the same capacity as this, Netero and Periston were enemies, but enemies who were each other's sole existence for surviving, to keep each other entertained, to be each other's yin and yang, which is why when Periston succeeded in killing off Isaac Netero and therefore opened the door to the Dark Continent, he was devastated. And here's the thing, this theory is even further backed up by the fact that after the conclusion of the Chimera Ant arc, Periston was the person who was able to steal all of the Chimera Ant eggs, which is why Periston basically currently has a standing possible army of Chimera Ants he can unleash at any point anywhere, something he's already planned to do, though he was foiled by Jing. So even though Netero is gone because of a ploy created by Periston and Beyond, hypothetically, there is somebody to keep Periston entertained and in check. And that person is Netero's spiritual successor, Gon's father, Jing. But what do I know? This isn't even my theory. I just decided to add a little meat to it. What do you guys think? Do you believe that this theory could be true? Do you believe that Periston and Beyond were behind the scenes manipulating the Chimera Ants to create a calamity to destroy Isaac Netero? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Let's be real. If you were 150 years old and still the strongest person on Earth, you'd probably be pretty bored too.